Right, good morning and welcome to the third of the Mental Health and Wellbeing podcasts produced by Goffs-Churchgate Academy. We'd like to welcome our friends from Goffs Academy to this recording as well. Our podcasts are to do with mental health and wellbeing, and we're talking to people from a wide variety of sections of the community who can bring their own experience and advice to the videos, which hopefully will be a help to all communities, let alone Goffs-Churchgate and Goffs Academy. This morning, I'd like to introduce you to Mike, who's from the Metropolitan Police. Mike, I'd like to hand over to you. And could you introduce yourself, please, and give us a little bit of background about your mental health journey and your dog, Dexter, please.
Good morning, Jim, and good morning to everyone at Goffs Academy. My name is Mike Sheether. I am a serving police officer within the Metropolitan Police, and my current role is as a dog handler. I've been in the Metropolitan Police for 28 years, and I joined in November, I came out of Hendon in 1993. Jim's asked me to come along this morning just to explain to everyone about the current work that I'm doing with a police dog called Dexter. Before I do that, I just want to explain to you why I am so interested and passionate about mental health in the workplace and how it can affect people. As I say, I joined in 1993 at the age of 26 and had not experienced any kind of or shape or form of mental ill health. My experience with mental ill health and the journey that it took me on started in 2001 when unfortunately I suffered a bereavement of a baby daughter. That legacy went on to develop into a change of mood. I became very dark, very angry, but as time went on, it was never diagnosed. I think I had probably birth trauma, and it went on to develop into low-level depression. Never went to the doctors. I'm fine. As a police officer, you can be subject to stigma. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And also, as a serving police officer, it can be seen, or you can see yourself as being weak if you are unable to deal with your feelings and emotions and look after your mental health. So sometimes police dogs will not differentiate between a police officer and a suspect running away. So as we arrived at where the suspects were still being monitored by the off-duty officer, they were in a driveway which was hidden from the pavement, so they didn't see us coming up. All hell broke loose, as all good plans can do. We've got a saying in the police: the wheel came off. All of a sudden, the hero enters stage right, running to left, and it was the off-duty officer. And he bounced off the front of my car, my dog van, and from there our plan, it just went to pieces. So what happened, the off-duty officer got hold of one of the suspects, the driver and the operator of the area car, that's a big fast car that we have in the Met Police, they got out. The operator started chasing one of the suspects down the pavement. I was running after the officer, shouting at him very politely, please stop running, please stop running, police officer with a dog, police officer with a dog, stand still, stand still. As that happened, all of a sudden the suspect that we were chasing turned and fired 2 shots. Bang, bang! And it was in slow motion. For me, the world stopped, and I knew it was a proper gun. As I say, I've done the familiarisation at one of our firearm officers' patrol bases where you can go on the range and shoot a handgun. So I knew it was a live gun, and all of a sudden the officer that was stood in front of me, about 6 to 8 feet, fell to the floor. He fell to the pavement, and you know, that's certainly something I'd never experienced before. So I had to momentarily stop the chase. I had to recall my dog, who was still running after the suspect, who then, after he turned and fired 2 shots, ran down the pavement. And I had to check that the officer was okay. thankfully, his physical injuries were, although serious, it was a very nasty gunshot to his left elbow. That was the extent of his injuries. We could have taken another bullet, I guess. A few of the symptoms that you may experience if you go on to develop PTSD, which is what happened to me, is you have blame, shame and guilt, which is very bizarre. That evening, after the ambulance had come and taken Wayne away, Trojan officers or firearms officers, armed response officers arrived at the scene, and I carried on working for about 2 hours with Boz, searching every single garden, and I had to be told by the firearms inspector who was there with his troops, stand down, the guy's got away, because I just felt guilty that I'd allowed the guy, who thankfully is in prison serving a very, very long sentence for attempted murder. I thought I'd allowed him to get away. So after that process, with PTSD, it is absolutely normal for someone who has experienced a traumatic incident like that to actually have some sleep disturbance, have flashbacks, have strange feelings of guilt, shame and blame, as I say, maybe irritability, a little bit of anger. And in my training as a trim practitioner now, so I actually can support other officers who do experience traumatic incidents. It's after the 72-hour period that if these feelings still manifest themselves 4 to 5 weeks later, then that is when PTSD has started to manifest itself within you. And startlingly, I brushed it all off. Yeah, I'm fine, as police officers do. Yeah, it's just one of those things. It's part of the job. It's part of the role. I'm okay. I've got a warrant card, which I'll show you. Every police officer has a warrant card, and it's probably a bit cheaper than the one that Jim used to have when he was an officer, because obviously everything is around cost. But I thought that was bulletproof. That's armoured, right? I'm invincible. That's how I felt. I was in a specialist role. Prior to being in the dog section, I was a territorial support group officer, so they're the highest trained public order officers in the Met. So I thought I was fine, but what happened to me was I started having sleep disturbance, and I would wake up very, very suddenly in the night, around 2-3 o'clock in the morning, screaming, shouting, and you can imagine the effect that had on my partner at the time. I became very irritable, I was angry, I was very dark. Unfortunately, I hate to say, another common sign of somebody struggling with PTSD is substance abuse. In my case, I was drinking more than I should. The amounts of alcohol that I was drinking was probably not healthy. I was reading an article just before Christmas that was produced by Police Care UK, who are a really good charity that work a lot with the police services up and down the country. And they did a research study in conjunction with the University of Cambridge. And 1 in 5 police officers, after dealing with a traumatic event, so that could be witnessing a road traffic accident, or in my case, being shot at, or witnessing a police officer being shot, or a stabbing, or seeing your colleagues assaulted, 1 in 5 officers will go on to develop PTSD. However, 93% of those officers go back to work as if nothing had happened. Whether that's because of the stigma within the job, or they don't know where to turn. But interestingly, 72% of all officers that have PTSD do not know that they've got PTSD, and I think that's probably just because there is a lack of knowledge and a lack of training and a lack of understanding about what's going on.
Can I say, certainly in relation to that last point that you made, Mike, that really does resonate about the lack of knowledge, and certainly, you know, within the local communities, life in general, people could well be, you know, facing incidents, issues, ongoing issues that could well show itself over time as PTSD. And so that's one of the reasons why we're doing these podcasts, is to, I suppose in part, to reassure people, one, that they're not alone, and two, that, you know, there are ways of either being able to have a greater knowledge or to access the support that's out there. I mean, if you don't mind my asking, in relation to the PTSD, when was it diagnosed, or was it diagnosed, and how long did it take for that to happen before you accessed the appropriate medical support?
Sure, I don't mind talking about that, Jim. And the point that you make about education and training is invaluable. The more training and knowledge and awareness there is, then you can stop these things from happening much sooner. For me, it was never diagnosed, and it ruined a relationship that I had at the time. And I didn't actually go to my GP until 2 years later in 2013, because I came into work. The relationship that I was in was in its death throes. Came into work, loaded my dog into the dog van, went out, ran the dogs, and just sat in the car park of the park where I ran my dogs, and just sat there and thinking, I can't be here tonight. You know, I really cannot be here, as in being a police officer, because my mind was just not there. You know, all I was thinking about was how I find myself again in and that's the thing, you know, something that happens on duty can affect your home life. And similarly, if you're experiencing stressful incidents in your home life, it can affect your work. So for me, it wasn't until 2013 that I actually went to my GP, and that was the first time that I actually went sick I wanted it to be shown as depression, but my sergeant showed it as stress. So it was 2 years later, and it wasn't until 2 years later that I actually got a proper diagnosis. And by then I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and started a course of medication, and also CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, counselling, and I had 12 sessions of that, and that certainly went a long way to helping me get over it.
Just if it becomes apparent that my background has changed, it has, because I had to change rooms, but that just is part of the joys of life and recording. So, Mike, we were talking about your diagnosis and the fact that it came a couple of years after the incident that you'd spoken about. Is there anything further you'd like to add in relation to that?
All I would like to say, just finishing on that, is that once you've got a diagnosis, and I think it's almost like coming out, for want of a better expression, coming out that you actually do have something going on. I mean, I look after myself. Men in particular are really, really good at looking after their physical health, but not so good when it comes to looking after their mental health. And so for me, it was quite liberating to actually finally own up to myself. This is going on. This is why I'm not very good in personal relationships anymore, and this is why I can be irritable or angry or have dark thoughts. So for me, I would suggest that accepting it yourself, that you're not okay. I mean, that expression is out there in the media now. It's okay not to be okay. It took a long time for me to actually admit that to myself, that I wasn't okay. And that was the first step for me on my road to recovery. And I think I'd like to think I'm fairly intelligent. you start reading up on things. Oh my God, I've got this diagnosis of clinical depression. So we've now got Google, whereas before you'd have to go to the library and get a book out. So I Googled everything around clinical depression and PTSD. So that started my interest, I think, with regards to understanding what was going on in my brain, certainly. And so from there, in 2013, when I had the opportunity within the dog section, I undertook mental health first aid training. So that continued, again, reading a lot more. And back in February of last year, unfortunately, I had another relapse and was removed from operational duties because stupidly, I'd taken myself off my medication because I thought I was okay. And again, because of things that were going on in my home life, it started. The depression again became unmanageable. So in February of last year, I again spoke to my supervisor and my line manager, who were very, very supportive, and I informed them I was going back onto antidepressants, and they were concerned about the side effects they were concerned that the effects of the side effects, if that makes sense, can impact on my ability as a police officer.
Could I just ask, Mike, sorry to interrupt, but you say that your depression became unmanageable. For anyone watching this podcast, would you mind talking about how that presented itself, just for people to understand how that might?
Unfortunately, again, the catalyst for that particular event last February was another breakdown in a relationship, and it is all. Depression has this effect on you. It can visit you. Winston Churchill called it his black dog, and if you go onto YouTube, you can see videos called "Living with a Black Dog" and "I Have a Black Dog." The black dog, ironically, I now have a black dog in the form of Dexter, is an analogy for depression. And they're really good short videos, so if anyone is interested, go and have a look at those on YouTube. When the black dog visits you, it's debilitating. I'm sure some of your students may have seen Harry Potter. The scariest monsters in Harry Potter, having had to sit through them with my eldest son when he was younger, are the Dementors. And that is what mental ill health can be. It is a dementor. It can be debilitating. So how did it present itself? Not wanting to get out of bed. The only thing that used to get me out of bed on bad days was the fact that I've got two dogs to walk. So they have to be exercised. You'd think getting out of the house is a really good thing, but when you're in the depth of a depressive episode, all you want to do is not see anyone, you don't want to speak to anyone, you turn your phone off, and then you go back to bed. And that's what happened. So that was how I said it was unmanageable. It was affecting my ability to actually come to work, because you ask anyone, certainly within the police service, who has a mental ill health condition such as depression, for me, you hide it. You become a master of disguise. So you go sick with everything that you can possibly think of that isn't actually depression, because there is still this stigma attached to it. And I think that's part of the problem with the police service, is that the stigma causes more problems for people, because they can't go and get help because they're worried about what their peers are going to think. So a colleague of mine called Sean Turner, who was the instructor at the dog school in Preston, was contacted by a really great guy. He's a DCI with our Directorate of Professional Standards.
Detective Chief Inspector. Just for people who
Sorry.
Know.
A Detective Chief Inspector, a very senior police officer. He is called James Fox, and he asked Sean, what can you do for my guys and girls that are working in these circumstances? So Sean started taking some of the dogs from Eston into the hubs every day, every week. And one of those dogs was Dexter. Dexter, in February, bless him, he was destined to be a passive scan drugs dog. So what is a passive scans drug dog? They are the ones that you may see at railway stations, coach stations, tube stations. They're the dogs that are trained to sit in front of a member of the public, a possible suspect who may be carrying illicit substances such as drugs, for example. That's an 8-week course, and in February he was withdrawn from training halfway through because he was not only deemed as not suitable, because he's too friendly, believe it or not, too sociable, and he lacked focus and concentration. All he needed to do was look out the window, and that would have been my school reports back when I was at school. So, could do better. Mike lacks all the rest of it. So he was kind of in limbo. Yeah, he was kind of in limbo at that stage. We didn't really know what we were going to do with him, or the school didn't, not myself. So when I arrived at the dog school, and Sean, who is an instructor, I'm a trainer but not an instructor, he became very busy with having to do other things down at the school. So I took on the visits, and I saw for myself the positive effect that taking dogs into a room of people who, you're talking about big burly police officers, and big strong firefighters. They just go gooey as soon as the dog comes in. Everyone is smiling, hey, it's Dexter, it's Daisy. And when we took some puppies in, it was just like the whole room just stopped. Everything just stopped for the dogs. And having been a dog handler for nearly 14 years back then, always knew that there was something going on. If I'd had a bad day or something was gone in my life, my dogs would come into the house, and I'd just spend time with them. So I always knew there was something going on. There's a connection between dogs and humans. And I started doing a bit of research and found out that when you interact with a dog in a positive way, so that's gentle stroking, I'm not talking about rough play or joshing as we call it, it releases a hormone into your brain, and that hormone is called oxytocin. Amongst other things, oxytocin is the hormone that forms the bond between a new mum and a new baby if the baby's fed naturally. But what we're trying to achieve by using Dexter in a wellbeing role within the police is to encourage that release of oxytocin. So oxytocin fights the stress hormone called cortisol. I know that's a lot of science in one sentence, but we need a certain amount of cortisol within our body, certainly as a police officer, to deal with the fight-flight reaction when confronting stress or trauma. Too much and it can cause anxiety. You might find your heart racing out of control, your blood pressure goes up. So for those amongst you, the audience, that have a dog or a cat, believe it or not, or even a rabbit, anything with fur, it promotes that release of the hormone. So that was interesting for me. So when the dog, what I was seeing in these hubs was three things. There was an immediate uplift in mood. It provided distraction from their workplace stresses, so they weren't thinking about the difficult and challenging task that they were having to undertake and the poor souls that they were having to prepare for the coroner, and they were getting the oxytocin release. So there's lots of positive things that comes from just having a dog visit you, basically.
Yeah.
So that carried on for about until May the 15th, when they were all stood down, because we saw the levels of the unfortunate deaths falling. And as a mental health first aider and part of my department's Blue Light Champion Network, I then suggested the idea of taking Dexter around our department, the task force. So I did that. Again, positive results, really good feedback, which led me to then ask the question of my SLT, why don't we have a wellbeing dog as a permanent portfolio within the dog section? It's something that we could offer to every single police officer, every single police member of staff, in whatever role they do, to go and support them if they deal with a traumatic incident, such as I put a business case together, and in July of last year, that business case was accepted. For me, I wasn't going to be the person that was going to be doing the visits. I had my sights set on becoming an instructor, a dog training instructor down at the dog school. That's how I saw myself finishing out my service. I've got 2 years left to complete within the police service, within the Met, before I can retire. So I thought, what a great way to give back to new dog handlers. However, like Dexter, I failed. I failed by 5 points. And for me, good things fall apart, so great things can fall together. And that's exactly what happened. So having missed out on the opportunity to be a dog training instructor, I'm still on the select list. So if a vacancy does arise, I can have first dibs, I guess. But I certainly probably won't, because I'm so into what I'm doing now. So my boss asked me whether I wanted to become the project lead for the Wellbeing dog scheme within the task force, and that's what I did, and that's where I am now. So the scheme launched on the 24th of August last year, and I had to do an audit just before Christmas for my boss to show the work that I've been doing, and I had undertaken over 92 wellbeing visits and sessions within the first 4 months of the scheme. Because it's up for review next month, I wrote a 6-month trial period into the business case, and that comes to an end at the end of next month, end of next February. But it's been hugely successful. Really, really popular. And I've had lots of feedback. After every visit that I do, I send the officer who requested the visit from Dexter a feedback form, and some of the feedback has been amazing, really, really positive.
Now, there is an element in the room,
to
coin a phrase, which is, I know before we went on air as such, we spoke about young Dexter. Of course, he isn't with you, but there are reasons why that wasn't going to be appropriate. Could you just, for the listener, explain why he couldn't be with us, unfortunately?
It's just a logistical issue, Jim. Unfortunately, I'd love to have Dexter in the room with me, but he would provide too much of a distraction for me. As I said to you before we started recording, he would be jumping up onto the table. He's a real live wire. He's only just turned 2, and I didn't realise this until I started handling a Labrador, because my background has always been German Shepherds, and I have a Springer Spaniel as well. Labs don't mature until they're about 4 years of age, so he is a real baby. He's going through his teenage years, so he just thinks it's fun to cause chaos. So when Dad's speaking to somebody, so I've undertaken quite a few of these Teams meetings now, he will just jump all over the computer and cause utter chaos. So unfortunately, it's also very difficult because of the way the camera is situated on my laptop. It would be really difficult to actually capture him on the camera, if that makes sense. I'll probably have to get right down on the floor, and then he'd think I'm having fun, and it'd just be jumping all over me. So as we know, as we've spoken, let's just hope that we can get through this lockdown. Life starts to return to normal, and you can meet Dexter in the flesh and experience the healing power of fur, as we call it.
Absolutely. Well, one of the sort of couple of points I was going to make before we wrap up was based around what is clear. I would say not only from what you've just said about animals and their positive impact on mental health, but the fact that we've spoken about Dexter, who's not even in the room, and he's made us laugh. You know, which, you know, and I don't
That's,
think the irony should be lost on that. You know,
no, I mean that's the thing, Jim. You know, animals are really, really good for us. There's been a lot of research done. The majority of that research has been done in the States, and there's a doctor called Brian Hare who's a researcher, and he did quite a lot of work around it, and he paraphrased his work in one sentence. He said, the only job a dog has is to make people in stressful situations feel good. And that's exactly true. That's what happens. So today I'm at Kentish Town Police Station, and this afternoon I'm going to be visiting all the officers that are going to be working from 2 o'clock until 10 o'clock tonight or 11 o'clock this evening, to give them the opportunity to interact with Dexter. But the serious side is, and this is another thing that I know we're looking at the clock, but if I may say that once you've got your audience, my audience, people that attend my sessions, once they're relaxed, and when you're interacting with the dog, it's like a kind of mindfulness. You're not thinking about anything else other than being with Dexter. You can then get your message across, and the message that I then get across is, we're talking about how big a problem mental health is within the police service. Last year, over 60,000 days were lost to police officers going sick with psychological disorders. 60,000 days in 1 year.
Very sobering.
That equates to 145 years of productivity in 1 year.
Wow.
And that figure, over the 60,000, only represents the officers that are brave enough to actually go sick with mental ill health, not the ones that are going sick with stomach disorders, bad back, seasonal flu. So my work's continuing. I think we're looking at expanding the scheme to recruit another suitable dog and another suitable facilitator. So that's good news.
Yeah.
Well, the dogs are really important.
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, I was going to sort of likewise finish by saying, you know, the one thing that is very clear is that there is a massive sort of challenge for us all to break down the stigma that relates to mental health in its many forms. And one of the things I'd like to do is first of all, thank you for your honesty, which, you know, is very humble to listen to, and especially so, you know, sharing what you shared, because obviously one of the hopes that we have from our podcast is that anyone can view it, because it will be going on to YouTube, that somebody does, as a result, seek support or have a better understanding of where they are in their lives. And certainly, you know, the thing that we would love to do, lockdown restrictions permitting, is we have a Health and Wellbeing Day that takes place in July. And we'd love for yourself and Dexter to come along to meet our school community, and, you know, continue to send out that message, because our school community doesn't just involve our pupils, it's the staff, all staff, cleaners as well, and the families, absolutely, all of whom, you know, will be represented on the day. So I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time, Mike, and we really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, and look forward to meeting you and Dexter in the flesh.
Yeah, it'd be a privilege to meet you, Jim, and all your staff. Thank you, and the students.
Yeah, cheers, Mike. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Bye-bye.